Thank you very much. Well, I'm really pleased to be asked here today. Cutting a ribbon is a very exciting moment, and I think credit unions are just wonderful and terrific, and still, I'm afraid, undersung, underpromoted, and really there ought to be a credit union that everybody knows about everywhere that can be of use to people who are excluded, financially excluded. I think it's great that there's been this enormous growth in credit union membership. It's gone up it's trebled in just over a decade, and I think that's really impressive. You often hear a lot of very kind words from politicians about credit unions, and yet still I think it could do with a much bigger push than it often gets in lots of areas where there aren't ones, or they're quite a long way away, or quite inconvenient for people to get to, when really the whole point is these are people who really need help absolutely on their doorstep. I do think it's been a great disappointment that when Labour started off with tremendous enthusiasm in 1997, and it had 18 different social exclusion research teams looking at every sort of thing that kept people, that held people back, and one of the most important ones was about financial exclusion. And Gordon Brown really tried very hard to create a people's bank, a place where a banking system, part of the mainstream banking system, where everybody could get reasonable credit, once they'd established a reasonable amount of probity without necessarily having to have collateral. And I think he did try very hard, and I'm afraid the banks resisted it. And we ended up with basic bank accounts, which of course are no use at all when people need to borrow often quite small sums of money to stay afloat, that then, as you all know, precipitate them into absolutely horrendous debt because they can't access any kind of credit that is affordable by anybody, least of all by them. Outrageous rates of interest, which really ought to be outlawed and still aren't. And my own experience when I set out to write my book, Hard Work, when I went and worked recently in a number of minimum wage jobs, it was a book really designed for people who don't think about how it would be to earn only the minimum wage. People who are on the minimum wage know well enough about it. But the point about the book wasn't to say, I know what it's like to be poor. The point was to work out in great detail exactly what you spend, what you earn, what you spend, what it costs going to work, what the costs of just living in the most basic way in a council flat are. And within no time at all, despite the fact that I was being incredibly careful, I ended up having to get into debt, having to have a loan, because it was simply impossible. And so many people, even Guardian readers write me letters saying, if only they wouldn't be so improvident, if only they wouldn't borrow money, if only they'd learn to save first for a rainy day and then borrow money, without understanding how, when you're living that close to the edge, what a very, very small thing it takes to tip you over into needing to borrow. Most people borrow in some form or another for lots of their lives, yet somehow those who have least are expected to have some kind of superhuman prudence and providence. And I think that's the lesson that I really learned, that however hard you try, you just can't manage on minimum wage earnings as they are. So it was a lesson both about earnings but also about credit. And anyway, it's wonderful that this credit union thrives, does so brilliantly, goes from strength to strength. Very, very good news indeed, and may there be many more as successful as yours. Thank you.